show, the show which talks about all the various major football leagues in detail. Today, we are going to connect with interviews, and we have Mr. Ian Cheeseman with us, who is a lifelong City fan. He has been to a lot. He has seen City rise from, like maybe I won't say the lower leagues, but during the tough phase to where they are now, and has also been a commentator for quite a while for various big organizations, and also is an author who has co-authored multiple books. So without wasting much time, I'd like to first thank Ian for coming on the show. Thank you and welcome to the show, Ian. And I would like to begin by asking you, how are you and how have you been doing, during this pandemic period? Because now, beginning, it was like, okay, it's going to be 2 3 months. It's been almost close to a year and a half that we have been in this situation. So what have you been up to?
I've not been up to a lot really because we're all told we've got to stay at home. You can go out for work. I do a radio show once a week on a small radio station around here, so I go to the studio once a week. I do, as a journalist, go to one or two games now and again. Unfortunately, the City, which is a team that I've covered for the last 30 years, I'm too far down what you might call the journalistic pecking order. So I've only been to one game, actually attended one game, and that was for Sony TV in India when City played at Cheltenham in the FA Cup, because they have the FA Cup and Champions League rights. I will be going to Swansea as well on Wednesday, so it'll be great to actually travel somewhere and see something. Even though I'll have to keep away from everybody, I'll be driving on my own, I'll be sitting on my own, but it's still great to do that. I've been to a few lower division games, which is great to be at, but it's soulless. There's no people there, there's no atmosphere, and it's very strange. And during this time, I've also lost my father, who was in a care home, and the fact that I couldn't be with him probably for the last 6 months of his life. I was seeing him before that every day, bringing him out and taking him on trips and stuff. Broke my heart really, and watching him deteriorate mentally when this COVID hit was terrible. And so I have mixed feelings about football that we all love, carrying on as normal when so much of life has stopped. But it is what it is. And I know a lot of people are taking comfort from watching football during these times, but it can't carry on like this. We have to get back to some normality soon, I hope.
Definitely, and it's very sad to hear about your loss. I'm extremely sorry to hear about the same. And not only you, many of them all around the world, even Pep, for that instance, has been unfortunate, or he has lost something during this pandemic. When, like, especially during this pandemic, did you think that football is not very important? Because everyone follows it so much, and like the players are like maybe demigods in some respects. Like where they cannot make mistakes. So like did this pandemic also like a reality check for many people? Because okay, life goes on. I mean, there is much more than football. At least for you, did you think something like that?
I understand. I care very much about people's mental health. It's something that I'm learning a lot about during this pandemic. Something I might do more work in the future. And I've been ringing people, calling people, City fans who have contacted me after I made an appeal on social media and said, if you know anybody who's feeling very isolated and very vulnerable, and you think that they would know who I am and that they're a City fan, give me the telephone number, give me the name, and I'll call them and have a chat. So I do care about that. And I understand that there are a lot of people who at the moment are enjoying watching football on television because it's an escape from the constant news, some of it very negative about different strains and the spread of the vaccine. And obviously it's a lot of doom and gloom. And I very much respect the fact that people, want football to continue. I have a slightly different view, and this is in no way meant negative against people who consume football mainly on television, which clearly a lot of people in other countries do. That's generally the way that they would watch football. But as a person who, since I was a small boy, started going physically to football matches, I miss it so much, and I can see that the sport itself is not as the same. It's played at a slightly slower tempo. than it was before the pandemic when it was being played in full stadiums. And although I don't condone cheating or anything negative in football, we're missing a sort of edge that comes from the crowd. I can tell it, and I can see that. So you might say that when I go to Swansea on Wednesday, I'm being a little bit hypocritical because I don't believe football at the moment should be being played. I think during this pandemic, it should have stopped. However, it's not my decision. It continues on. And I'm a professional, I'm a journalist, and this is how I make my living. So I will go to the game, and I will go to whatever games I'm allowed to go to, because that's how I make my living. But I actually am not a fan of football as it is at the moment, being only on TV. I don't know whether people who watch football mainly on TV as a normal can see the same differences that I can see, but it certainly doesn't feel the same game. Ironically, Manchester City, the team I support, I think have probably benefited from the absence of fans. Perhaps benefited is the wrong word, but been least damaged by the absence of fans, because I think that the type of football that they play, which is all about controlled possession, which is all about passing and movement on perfect pitches, is unaffected by the absence of a crowd, where teams that have relied on sort of long balls and being physical and tactical fouls and all that type of thing, which are often encouraged by supporters inside the stadium. I think they've been affected more than City have been affected. And again, I don't mean that in any detrimental way. I feel very fortunate to watch City right now at a time when they have brilliant owners who've invested an awful lot of money, and a lot of talent has been brought to the club. So we're one of the elite, in terms of the clubs. We've not always been like that. And when we were, not at that level, the other clubs at that time would have had a huge advantage. And I can see that City now have a huge advantage. It doesn't guarantee they're going to win every trophy, because there are probably 4 or 5 different clubs who are of the same level in the Premier League, and certainly around Europe. There are several more clubs if you include Madrid and Barcelona and Bayern Munich and other clubs like that. So therefore, those competitions like the Champions League are a little bit more difficult to win. But I think at this time, in this situation that we're in, through nobody's fault, I think it actually helps City, funnily enough, in the way that they play, which is, I think, the reason why this season now that they will go on to win the Premier League, I think, fairly comfortably.
Definitely. And and what point you made, like you had been to the stadium since you were a kid, and you grew up watching City, and that is something that. So can I like I've been to games when I was at Barcelona. I went for around 10 or 15 games, not much compared to what you have been, but I think with whatever small sample space that I have, or the small sample space of experience that I have, I can connect with you, like in the sense that I think for you, like, can I paraphrase it, like for you, football is not just what is happening on the field. It is like maybe driving to the stadium, maybe a beer, or maybe something, maybe the more experience, maybe where you sit, maybe your partner who is sitting at the beside of you. Is it because of that brings you to football much more than just what is being on the field?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely love football, and what's on the field is very central. I have a proper passion, so when I watch the football, I watch it very intently. I don't drink, as it happens, and I don't sort of stand and cheer at games. For the last 25 years, I've actually been a professional journalist, so it wouldn't sit right anyway if I was having a beer or jumping about or swearing or singing, because obviously I'm doing a job. But during the course of a football season, I would attend typically something like 120 football matches in a year, of which 60, half approximately, would be every single City game, home and away, including the European games. But the other 60 would be other games that I'm lucky enough to be able to attend, when sometimes I don't have any allegiance, or sometimes I just have a little bit of an allegiance. And those occasions, quite often, I'm not working as a journalist, but I still watch the football in the same way. But everything around the football, because of the way that I've been brought up and what I've been used to, is just as important. I mean, I've travelled with a friend of mine to home and away to games since the 1970s. So spending time with him on the trips, I've travelled with journalists, I've travelled with other supporters, arriving at the other city on away games. I always enjoy the away games almost more than the home games, because you get to visit places that you wouldn't necessarily visit, especially when it comes to big European cities that maybe you've not visited before. So that's all part of the experience for me. I know there are a lot of fans for which going to an away game, particularly in Europe, is for them, it's just about having a trip away with other guys and maybe drinking a lot, which is fine. That's their choice. That's not the way I've been. When I go to Madrid, when I go to Barcelona, when I went to Pilsen, I went and look around the brewery in Pilsen, and yet I don't drink. I just went for the history, for the interest of it all, and it's a social activity, and we're social people. Human beings are social people. I mean, speaking to you now is nice because I'm socialising with you, you might say. But at the moment, we're spending a lot of time just with, not that, don't get me wrong, I love my family, but it is just the same 2 or 3 people that you're seeing all the time. So socialising at football, at the theatre, travel, those are all things that I feel very passionately about. And the football is central to that. Often that's the reason why I've travelled and I'm seeing things. But in the old days, I mean, I'm old enough to have seen City very, very successful at the end of the 60s and into the 70s. So they've not always been a poor team when they had bad times in the late 90s and into the beginning of the 2000s. Of course, those were the worst when they were relegated to the third tier of English football. But I still love the camaraderie. I wore it as a badge of honour to be at Macclesfield Town and York City and Bristol Rovers watching my team that showed that I wasn't there just for the good times. And we, as a supporter group, the City fans, have a sense of humour, which is all about being self-deprecating and laughing at ourselves. And even now, in the midst of all this success, one of the most popular songs on the terraces from the City fans, and I do go in the away end quite a lot since I've become a YouTuber, is, we never win at home, we never win away, MCFC, okay. And they're singing that when we're winning somewhere. It's just part of the humour, and that's one of the things that attracted me to the club when I was a small child.
Definitely. And like you said, like how you were fortunate enough to see City when they were successful maybe in the past, and compared to but I think, like, personally, what, in my limited knowledge, I think this has been the most successful City I've ever been as a period in an era. So how has that transition been? Although they were successful, maybe it was like in patches instead of like a dominance that they have like right now. So how has it been, like going from maybe that to now, where you probably are, if not now, maybe in 10 years more, in a decade more, you'll be one of the biggest players in the world.
Yeah, it's a strange one because there are 2 generations now, if you like, of City fans. There are those who discovered City, particularly from other countries, after the 2012 Sergio Aguero last-minute goal to win the league. And since then, they followed the club very closely through successive managers, three managers, Mancini, Pellegrini, and now Pep Guardiola. Unprecedented success. Great football. And there are the generation of fans like me who, they're not all my age, but have watched some of those bad times, and so now are pinching themselves and thinking, this is unbelievable, but our expectation levels are not quite the same. And if you were talking to a United fan who's the same age as me, who's grown through the same era as me. Although I do remember at the beginning of the 70s, United being relegated to the second tier of English football as well, which was something as a City fan I very much enjoyed, I have to admit. They've seen so much success over such a long period of time that if they're third or fourth in the league, they're all, pretty depressed and calling for the head of the manager all the time. Whereas if City, and this would seem like a strange thing to say to younger fans and fans of those other clubs, if I didn't see City win another trophy, it wouldn't bother me. I've had some great moments. I was there I was commentating for the BBC. I was doing the ball commentary on BBC Radio when Sergio Aguero scored that goal. I've seen City win at Real Madrid. I was there in the ground. I've seen all these great moments. I've seen them win the FA Cup, the League Cup, the Community Shield. The only thing that eluding me as a supporter and as a journalist is the Champions League, and I would like to see that one day. Not at the moment in an empty stadium, I have to admit, but when I can be back at grounds and when it goes back to normality, I would love to see that. But it isn't the be all and end all for me. It's about having fun. It's about socialising, and the anger that I see from some types of fans towards each other or towards their own club is something I can't really relate to. We're only on this earth once, and we're here to have fun and enjoy ourselves and shake hands with people and be friendly. You can have a rivalry. I've just said that I was delighted when United got relegated back in 1973. I enjoyed that very much. But not why do we have to be angry with each other? Have fun, have banter. That's fine. That's all part of the fun. But no, I don't want to see it spill over into anger. But that's just me.
No, I completely agree. I think my first question when I asked you, like, when footballers are seen as demigod, I meant like my paraphrasing was wrong. Maybe I meant it in this way, like people maybe continued outside of the game. Like I think recently Mike Dean was unfortunate after his, although he made a mistake, maybe like to receive threats. I mean that is not acceptable, like because people like it's a game, and end of the day, like that may have a lasting impression on him, like for someone it may just be one word or one sentence, but for that family it might be a long lasting effect. So yeah, in my opinion, you make sense a lot, like like I think I don't know, like if someone had said this, like you are rivals and not enemies or something on that lines, I don't know, like if that makes sense, like.
Yeah, rivals rather than enemies. That's a good expression. I mean, I follow German football quite a lot because my mum was German. And so my team is the one from the town where she grew up, which is Schalke, who are currently bottom of the Bundesliga, by the way, having a terrible season. But they have a great rival with Dortmund. And I've been over to derby matches between Schalke and Dortmund. And I'm not saying everybody's perfect and there isn't any anger. But I saw a section or sections in the ground where there were people sat next to each other, one with a Schalke top on, one with a Dortmund top on. They hadn't necessarily travelled to the game together, but they were there, sat there. And what you saw was that when one team scored, the guy wearing the shirt who was appropriate would jump up and cheer, and the other guy maybe look a little bit fed up. And then at the end of the game, they would shake hands and walk away. Well, why can't it be like that? Maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but that's how I'd prefer it to be. And you can have a joke with somebody. Actually, Manas Singh, who presents the show that I'm involved in on Sony TV Sports at the moment, is a big Liverpool fan. And he privately messaged me in the last 24 hours after City beat Liverpool at Anfield. And he, more or less sort of said, I bet you enjoyed that, didn't you? And he was being sarcastic with a winky eye or something. And I just said, I hope you enjoyed it as much as me, with a laughing face. Now that's banter. If Manas walks up now to talk to me, I'd embrace, well, obviously not in COVID times, but I would embrace him and wish him well and have a laugh with him. I wouldn't fall out with him. I wouldn't get angry with him. Why would I do that? I mean, he's a fellow football fan. He has a team. I have a team. That's how it should be.
And definitely, I think you enjoyed it because I think it's the first time you all won at Anfield since 2003, if I'm not wrong. So how was the performance? Like, was it a statement like, okay, we are going to win the league? Because before that, okay, like we have seen teams, although may not be City, like lose 7 points. I think Liverpool had lost, I think 2 years back when City won. I think they were in similar situation. Like, was yesterday a statement? Yeah, we are going to win the league.
I can see why you and other people would look at it that way, but to me, City are a team that, as I said before, are playing a certain type of football that works perfectly in these situations that we're in at the moment. And I feel as if even before that game at Anfield, City were already going in the right direction and Liverpool were going in the wrong direction. I look at Manchester United, who statistically are still in the title race, and I don't really see a serious threat coming from them. Now, that's not me speaking in a bantery way. That's just me observing what I'm seeing. I don't see Leicester City being a threat. I don't see West Ham United or Aston Villa being a threat, or Chelsea. So those are the teams that are around at the moment. City are on a completely different level. They've slightly altered the way that they play this season under Pep. Perhaps they've adapted to these conditions. Maybe they would have evolved like this anyway. But the amount of movement that they have from players, the discipline that players have for keeping the position that they're meant to be in. I mean, I watch all Pep's press conferences, and one of the things that he said last Friday was that earlier on in the season, players were actually running too much, that they were, trying to create space all the time. And he tries to drill into them that what you do is you stay in your position. I don't mean completely stay, of course, but essentially you stay in the position that is your position and you let the ball do the work. And now that's what City are doing far more. All of it, City to perform well needs all 11 players to be right on the same wavelength, that they think exactly the same as each other. If there were one or two players in that team that thought slightly different and played slightly differently, it wouldn't work. A good example of that is when Cancelo came in. He was slightly thinking the way he used to think. You could even argue that about Rodri, but you can certainly see it in certain players. I would argue that Mendy still thinks a little bit the way he did when he was at Monaco, and that's one of the reasons why he doesn't fit into this team quite as well. Whereas Zinchenko has completely changed his game. He, as a young player, was an attacking left-sided midfielder, and now his game is all about passing. It's all about being in the right position and ball retention. And if you keep, lots been said about City's defence. Ruben Diaz, John Stones, and a lot of praise has gone to them for the lack of goals that City are conceding. But in my opinion, even though I do think that Ruben Diaz has added some quality, I think the real secret as to why City now are, far more solid in terms of conceding goals is because of the very precise passing and knowing when to take a risk. So they're taking less risks in dangerous areas. So if you give the ball away on the edge of the centre circle because of a sloppy pass, you're vulnerable to the counter-attack. And Arsenal did that in the FA Cup semi-final last year. You could argue Lyon did that in the Champions League when they beat City. And United beat City 2 out of 3 last season. And it was always because of counter-attacks and mistakes. Now, those mistakes have gone. So some of the credit should go to Ruben Diaz, to John Stones, to Gundogan, to whoever it is that was making those mistakes before. They were not making them now. But I don't think all the credit should go to defenders. I think this is a collective thing. It's all about the players. Almost every single pass that they make and every single move they make, I can now see as a spectator, as a journalist, as a fan, however you want to describe me, that when the ball comes to that player and you never feel that frustration of thinking, why didn't he pass it there? He should have passed it that way. They always seem to make the right decision. And that's come from Pep. That's come from being drilled over and over again. And that's why they're on the rise now. So the win at Liverpool, to get back to your original question, was highly significant. Psychologically, you can see that Jurgen Klopp, who's making some ridiculous statements at the moment, about Alisson's feet being cold and City having a 2-week break because of the COVID, which first of all they didn't, and I wouldn't describe having a training ground closed and players all absent as taking a break, when they're actually ill. So I think those are ridiculous comments, but to me show that he's under pressure, that he and his players know that they're under pressure. So I think City were already early on in the season, people were sort of writing City off. But if you look back at that table, it was quite compact. The gap in points wasn't ever very big. And City were always playing catch up because they were always at least one game behind. And now, even now with the game behind, they've hit top. So they're just going to stretch out, I think, and win this league comfortably.
To be honest, even I was one of them who wrote them off because go out like what situation Klopp is at right now. I think Guardiola faced something similar last year when he was continuously under pressure, like criticized, maybe not given the proper due credit, like what he has achieved at City, during his time there. Like I think it's just a circle where maybe okay, Klopp is in under pressure right now. Maybe next year someone else will be. I think that's uh, I think a revolving table for maybe the journalists to maybe pick on the next manager whoever is underperforming, and maybe rightly so because they are the champions and more focus will be on them. But do you think like this City group, like what right now, what core, what you're playing is the strongest during the Guardiola era? Because some of the statistics that are coming out, I think it has not been achieved. Like maybe like the goals conceded. I mean, Guardiola had always like sorted out the defense, but this is something very new, at least in my knowledge.
I agree. It's funny because, well, clearly the COVID and not being at the stadiums is affecting me and affecting the way that I'm judging things. But I still think that the Centurion season and the 98-point season when City went on that winning run towards the end to keep Liverpool just away from winning the league were real exceptional seasons. City could, in theory, win the lot this year. It's not impossible. Obviously, cup competitions, as perfect as City's football is, and I do believe it's perfect. I write newspaper columns as well, and last week I wrote one that described City's football as perfect. But perfect in the football sense can never actually exist. No football's perfect. You can always lose games. You can always concede goals. This team is not perfect. And in the league, because you play 38 games and because the majority of your games, if we're being honest, are against teams who are substantially less quality than City are, partly because of money, but also partly because of resources. So City have great training facilities, great powers of recovery, are able to employ the greatest coach in the world, as well as buy some of the best players. So that gives you a huge advantage. But in cup competitions, in a one-off game particularly, you can lose. So City play at Swansea on Wednesday, and it's not impossible that City could lose at Swansea, even though they're a championship team. Because we saw against Sheffield United in a Premier League game recently that even though City were leading by a goal to nil and were quite comfortable, really, right near the end, Sheffield United had a chance through Fleck, always played to him, and it was, a super shot that just went past the post. If that had gone in, then that game could easily have ended 1-1. And then you go into extra time, they put everybody behind the ball. City hit the post, one goes over the bar, who knows? They end up in a penalty shootout and City lose. Or another moment happens for Sheffield United and you can lose. So they can lose. They could lose at Swansea. The League Cup final against Tottenham, at the moment, Tottenham are playing not particularly well from what I understand. So you would expect City, they're playing them tomorrow, to beat them quite comfortably. But the game's not played till the end of April and we don't know where we'll be up to then. The Champions League is 2 legs, so that helps City because over 2 legs, you would expect their quality to come to a 4, but there is a higher standard in that Champions League. I mean, who wants to play Bayern Munich at the moment? So there are other teams that could beat them. I think Pep's philosophy and way of playing is perfectly suited to dominating league football, but cup football, there was always an element of luck in it. So they could win all four. Is this team then, if they win all four, a lot of people will say it's the best City team ever, possibly the best team that's ever existed in the Premier League. At the back of my mind, though, I'm afraid, will still be, yes, but it was done behind closed doors in a COVID-affected season where not only does COVID keep people away, but things have happened that have effectively questioned the integrity of football. Because I live not too far away from Oldham Athletic, and they were due to be at home to Bournemouth in the third round of the FA Cup. And with 24 hours to go, the game was switched to the away ground at Bournemouth because of the weather. That would have never happened normally. And they lost 4-1. So I'm just using that as an example, but decisions are being made that do affect the integrity of the sport. Teams being asked to play, clubs being asked to play football when there is an outbreak of COVID. I know City, ironically, have had their game at Everton called off and other teams have played. But as long as this outside force is affecting football, it doesn't feel right. And I'll enjoy watching it. I'm a City fan, I suppose, but not in the same way as normal. So there'll always be an asterisk, it feels like, next to whoever wins whatever they win this season.
Definitely. And you spoke about the team, and I think at least as of now, a bright spark has been Phil Foden, and there's always question mark over him whether he should have stayed at City, because maybe they took the example of Sancho, who has gone on to Dortmund, maybe achieved a bit more than maybe what Foden has in his career till now, and he has come a lot, in terms of performance this season, where he has been, I think, one of the most bright spark as for a full City team, let alone the young players. So do you think Foden is the real deal, or because at City, you have a lot of players who come up and maybe one season you perform extremely well. Like, I'll give you an example. At least in my knowledge was Negredo. When he first came, the first 6 months he was unplayable. Then it's slowly faded away, and you have a lot of players like that. In your uh, experience, do you think that this Phil Foden, at least what you have seen till now, is he the real deal going forward?
That's a difficult question to answer, really, because I'm sorry to keep coming back to it, but I don't see him in the stadium at the moment, so I don't see what he's doing off the ball, and I think that's part of the game. I mean, I watched the game like everybody else did at Anfield, and I didn't think he was particularly good in the first half of that game. I thought his contribution was actually very average at best. Obviously, he was involved once the position was moved and Pep moved him. Suddenly he burst into life and had two very significant moments. He created with a beautiful piece of control one of the goals for Gundogan to tap home, which was outstanding. And then he scored a great goal. And we've seen Mahrez playing in that position, trying to cut in from that wing and hit that type of a shot. And yet 9 times out of 10, the defender seems to get a block in the way, whereas Foden was that quick with his feet and that quick to unleash the shot and hit it with so much power that he couldn't be stopped. So those two moments suddenly elevated what had previously been a relatively ordinary performance into man of the match, and suddenly he's getting the headlines. I, like all City fans, want him to succeed because we know his history is that he's a City fan, and he only this week in an interview he said he wants to play out his career at Manchester City, and if he continues or improves his potential, then you can see that would be a great asset. So why would I want him to fail? I've had my doubts so far. He's starting to slowly convert me, but I think if you were to put Phil Foden in a different type of team, I'm not sure he would shine in quite the same way. I think his way of playing suits the Pep Guardiola style, a bit like Bernardo Silva, another player who has similar type of qualities. So you can never tell with the youngster. You don't know how he'll be affected as he, by everybody telling him he's great. We've seen historically players like Paul Gascoigne struggle to cope with that sort of adulation. Let's hope that he's grounded. Let's hope that he, the incident that happened when he was on England duty isn't something that, vulnerability that he has. He's got to stay fit, of course. So there are all sorts of factors that mean you can never guarantee anything. People have compared him to Iniesta. I think Iniesta was a wonderful, wonderful player who, at the moment, I still think, even at that age, is a higher level than Foden. But if he continues to develop, if he improves and his head's right, then fingers crossed that he will develop into the player that people think he is now. But I don't think he's quite there yet. And I think, to be honest, I think Pep probably thinks the same as I'm doing, which has been the reason why he's done it slowly, and why even after that game yesterday, in his post-match press conference, he himself highlighted that he was disappointed with his first half performance. As long as you've got a coach like that over your shoulder, you'll continue to develop, I guess. But we'll see with Foden. I mean, interestingly, he was in the same youth team as Sancho and Brahim Diaz, who moved away from City as well. And of the three of them at that time, I thought Foden was actually the weakest of the three. But I don't watch Sancho week in, week out. I don't watch Diaz week in, week out. But Foden is the flavour of the month. So clearly, he's the one at the moment who's getting all the plaudits.
So does that scare you? Because sometimes what generally we see, at least from outside, is that a player being hyped up so much, probably he'll not be able to fit into or develop that well. Because maybe even maybe 4 months back, Foden would, you did not know that whether Foden would be in the England setup for the upcoming tournament. But now they are saying, okay, they're fast tracking him, he should be there, where he should play. At least the pundits, they're saying that, so that will put an immense pressure, subconsciously. Okay, he has to perform, at least for the fans. They'll have their hopes tied on him. Do you think that will be detrimental for him as a player going forward? And even as an England fan, maybe pundits have to stop doing that.
There's a couple of things there I would say. Is that I personally believe that international football these days, maybe not in the past, but international football is a lower standard than Premier League or the big leagues in Europe. The quality is just not the same. So to excel for England would, ironically, I think, be easier than to excel at the moment for City, because the standard is so high. I believe that City and lots of other club sides, if they were able, it's impossible, of course, because their players are in international sides, but if you were able to have a Brazil or a Germany or a Spain or a France play against Manchester City or Liverpool or Manchester United or whatever, I believe the club sides would win, and they would win the tournament. In terms of how Foden will be affected by the ongoing adulation, the biggest word of warning I would give would be a player who you may, and other people watching this may not remember, but there was a player called Michael Johnson who was being compared to Colin Bell, my great hero, when he was coming through. And I believe that Michael Johnson had the ability to have been an absolute player, a real one of the best. And he struggled. He struggled mentally. He couldn't cope with it, and he ended up drinking too much and just going off. He just couldn't deal with it, and that was a real shame, because he was a really. I still now I've occasionally talked to him since, and he seems now to have got his head back together and to be a really great human being, as well as being how I remember him, which was a very talented footballer. But it never happened for him. He's only 20, Foden. He's a kid, and I do wonder when I look around at the world generally, when a pop star comes along, or somebody like Greta Thunberg, who as a kid is suddenly on the world spotlight, and you wonder how psychologically that amount of fame and that amount of adulation and that amount of money, frankly, can affect you for good or for bad. And if somebody gave me the amount of money that Foden's on right now, even at my more mature age, how would I react to that? How would it affect me? I hope that I'd have enough life experience to be able to deal with it in a good way. If anybody's got any money out of there and they could want to test me out on it, I'll send you my email address and my bank account number. But as young kids, I don't know how they do it. City have a reputation, though. It's not perfect. I mean, a young kid who was rejected by the academy not too long ago committed suicide. You may have seen that story as well. But in theory, City have a lot of support people around the academy and around the schools that these kids have gone to try to guide them through the pitfalls of suddenly becoming famous and rich. And let's hope that has worked and will continue to work for Foden. And then he's got more of a chance of being the player that people think he's capable of being.
Definitely, and I'll not hold you up much longer. I have last 3 or 4 questions, and you spoke about Colin Bell, and you also were an author, which you wrote a book. I guess, if I'm not wrong. So how did that happen? Was writing a book always in your maybe to-do list, or something that just popped up, and maybe you went along with the flow?
Yeah, it was a little bit like that. I mean, Colin Bell was my hero when I was a child. I identified with him because he was shy and quiet, but yet a supreme athlete. I don't mean I was a supreme athlete, but he was a supreme athlete. And I got to know him a little bit over the years of attending supporters club branch meetings. And when I was in the BBC, there was a chance for him, for me to nominate people to run what is effectively the Olympic torch, but for the Commonwealth Games. And I asked if I could nominate Colin because he was my hero. And when I asked him if he wanted to do it, he was very scared because he was frightened of getting a lot of publicity for it, and he didn't like that. So I promised him that wouldn't happen. He carried the baton. He got no publicity. And after that, our friendship grew even more because he trusted me. And I'd been trying to get an interview with him, a proper one-to-one interview with him, and he was very reluctant to do that. And at the end of the conversation, I just said, well, if you ever write a book, I'll write it for you. And to my astonishment, he just said, well, I'm thinking about writing a book. Are you serious? And I just sort of, in a split second, went, yeah, very confidently, but I had no idea if I could do it. So long story short, we spent 2 years where I'd go around to his house every day, not every day, once a week, spend a few hours with him. And I would chat to him one-to-one, record some of it. And we became actually very close friends. And I published that book some 15, 16 years ago, whenever it was, and was very, very proud of it. And as a result of that, I was asked by Rodney Marsh, another former City player, to write his book. But he was putting me under a lot of time pressure. And at the time, I was full-time at the BBC. So I couldn't do it in the time scale that he wanted. So I did part of the book and told him how I thought he ought to do the rest of it, a way of getting it out in the time he wanted by using multiple authors to do different parts of his book. So I wrote the City section of his book. I then wrote a book which was a diary of my own season. One year, I think it was 116 games I went to that season, and it was a diary of what it was like, with some hopefully some entertaining and funny stories of the journeys that I made. First season that City went back properly into Europe, going to Straymore in the Faroe Islands and all over Denmark and all sorts of other Cyprus. And that was also the season when Sheikh Mansour came in. So I did that just for a hobby, really. And then a couple of years ago, Vincent Kompany, through a publisher, came to me and said, would I write the story of the treble season in his words? So I, of course, agreed to do that and went and met him and spent a week at a training camp Anderlecht were doing, because he'd moved to Anderlecht, and wrote the book, which was to look back on the season that City won this treble triumph it was called. I mean, it's in his words, but the truth is that I probably wrote 50% of it myself, but ostensibly it's in his words. So I've written 3 books, but to write Colin Bell, my personal hero, and I know there will be claims now that there are players in this era who will be better, and Colin eventually will be forgotten. But for me, Colin will always be, the greatest player. And for my generation, he'll always be the greatest player. So to be given the privilege of writing his book and to become his friend was something I'll always be grateful for. And very sad, that a week ago, I think it was now, maybe 2 weeks ago, time, it seems strange at the moment in these COVID times. I was at his funeral and watching Russell Watson, a very famous tenor, singing "Abide with Me" and bring him home from Les Miserables, and stood watching him being buried, which was heartbreaking. If we'd been in normal times, I'm sure that thousands of City fans would have lined the streets, and the funeral could well have been in Manchester Cathedral rather than in the local church where it was. But we are where we are. Well, actually, Colin probably would have preferred a smaller send off, because that was the type of person he was.
Definitely. And that's amazing to hear, and like about your books and your journey, like personally along how you got along with that. And I wanted to ask, like you mentioned, like about Colin Bell and how he was a hero, probably like because, like you said, like after the 2012 Aguero season when he scored, although many of them had contributed before, but it is Aguero. You generally call it the Aguero season because of his goal, and like a lot of fans came in, and probably they aren't aware of the previous yesteryears, maybe the heroes or maybe the club legends who are to say. And like you also done a podcast in on YouTube, like you mentioned earlier. So like, do you cover all this over there, like about the maybe yesteryears heroes or something?
I do a mixture of different things. I mean, when I left the BBC, which was 3.5 years ago now, I launched a YouTube channel, which is called Forever Blue. And originally, the videos that I put on there were based on match days. So I would talk to fans before and after every game and focus on the fans more than anything, and also try to give people a flavour, particularly at the away games, of these other cities that I would visit. And the numbers rose quite quickly and they became very popular. And the club itself actually, for 2 years, paid for my content for them to put on their website, which was great. They wanted it to be very positive and never have any negativity in it, which was fairly easy because most of the time City were winning. But if occasionally they had a bad performance, I had to edit out anything that was negative for the club website. But once COVID hit, a year ago, basically the club, I offered to carry on doing what I was doing virtually, like we're doing now, and they didn't want that, and basically said that they'd moved on from my content. During the gap from when the football stopped to when it restarted, I didn't want the channel to just die. So I started interviewing people about big games of the past. So their memories of the Aguero day, but also their memories of 1999, the playoff final, when City beat Gillingham on penalties to come back out from the third tier of English football. We also picked on 1 or 2 individual players. And then I started also to add video versions of, not to be confused, I do an audio podcast once a week. And now, especially, we film that every week because we're doing it on Zoom or some other way of doing it. So we have a video version too. Now, rather than put an hour-long video up, I usually pick 5 or 10 minutes of the podcast and put that up on the channel. And I've also sat and interviewed, which is what you were asking me really, former players and heroes of the past to get them to tell their stories and their memories of being a manager or being a player at the club. And in fact, I have probably half a dozen of those interviews that I've not actually published yet, because at the moment it's hard to find sponsors and I need to make a living. So hopefully at some point a sponsor will come along and say, well, listen, I'll support you. Put my products, put my charity, whatever it might be, on the video and get them out there. And when that happens, then you'll see those videos. But I've already done quite a few. I did a series of videos with an astronaut called Doug Hurley, who was originally the pilot of Atlantis, the space shuttle. And last year he went up to the space station in Dragon, which got a lot of publicity around the world. It was the first manned American mission back from American soil. And I found out that Doug was a City fan. So I contacted him and said, how about chatting to me? And he gave me a lot of his time, and we did a 4-part interview about his career at NASA, but also about his love of Manchester City. And I'm actually going to talk to Doug again tomorrow, believe it or not, and ask him some more questions about City at the moment. And also, because I mentioned earlier on that I'm very concerned about people's mental health, I'm going to ask him how he's coped through lockdown, and whether, as a NASA astronaut, you get special training for this type of thing. So that'll go up at some point this week as well. So I do try to mix the type of videos that I do, and I also have a variety of ex-players on the podcast. So yesterday we recorded one that had Trevor Sinclair, former City player, as one of the guests. The week before it was Andy Dibble, former goalkeeper. And next week, Nader Manua, who was a defender, who was around at the time, actually, when Vincent Kompany was first there. He's agreed to come on the podcast. So I hope that slowly but surely, anybody that listens to my audio podcasts or watches the video vlogs will get history of the club through that medium. Because I think if you're a fan of a club, it isn't just about the present and the now. It is about where the club have come from. And actually the great joy of City being successful at the moment is because of the fact that they, for a long period, looked a million miles away from it. So it makes the success now all the sweeter. So I think history and where the club have come from is actually very important. So I hope that's reflected in the work that I do.
No, definitely. I've been following, maybe not religiously what you put out, but yeah, I've been keeping a track of what you put out, and that's amazing to see. Like, I think Trevor Sinclair was last night that you all did it, like after the game, I guess, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the game finished at
Yeah,
6:30 UK time. At 7:30 we were doing a podcast, and it lasts about an hour, and then probably another hour or so before it goes live. So by about 10 or 11 o'clock last night, so we always do them on Sunday nights. There might be an odd exception because a guest that we want to get on isn't available at that time, but generally UK time, I record them at about 7:30 on a Sunday evening, and they're live by Sunday, an hour or so after that. So by Monday, I'm in Ophir. People consume the stuff that I do all around the world, and they're all different time zones. I'm very aware of that. But for a UK basis, then that would give people the podcast to listen to maybe as they go into work on Monday morning, or But I get messages from people who listen to it in Australia, while they're on the beach or something. So it all depends where in the world you are, really, as to when and how you consume it.
definitely. And for any City fan who is maybe probably watching this and you're not aware, you should go follow Ian's channel, and I'll put the link, and probably that's something which will be very enlightening, maybe even for present news, and even maybe a peek into the past. So we'll have two more before we wrap up, and your best moment, like during your time associated with City.
Well, just before I answer that question, I don't know how much, because obviously I know Twitter's very, very big in the UK, and to a certain extent, well, no, not in a certain extent, it is also in the States. And this is ignorance on my part. I don't know how much Twitter is consumed around the rest of the world, but I have a Twitter account at Ian Cheeseman. And whenever I do anything, like the newspaper column that's gone live today, the podcast from last night, when a new vlog goes up, whatever I'm doing, the radio show, Twitter is always the first place that I tweet the links. And then all you do is click on the link and it takes you there. I also have a Facebook account, which is my personal Facebook account, Ian Cheeseman, but I also have one called Ian Cheeseman Forever Blue. So again, everything that I do, I put the links on that Ian Cheeseman Forever Blue account. So if you go and have a look at that, and anybody can look at it, then you'll see, if you work your way back, you'll see all the links to everything that I do. In terms of the greatest moments or games that I've had, the first game you ever attend is always very special, I think. And that was way back in 1970 when I saw City beat Schalke in the European Cup Winners' Cup semi-final, second leg. I was only a small boy, but Colin Bell, Neil Young, Mike Doyle all scored in that game. And because it was the first time I'd ever been to a match, it was quite overwhelming, really, and very, very emotional. Since then, obviously, as a Mancunian and the great rivalry with United, often the victories against United stand out. So 5-1 when Andy Hinchcliffe scored at Main Road against United, when the 3-1, the last Main Road game, when Sean Goulter robbed Gary Neville to score, the 6-1 at Old Trafford, when Dzeko scored after that great through ball by David Silva, and I was commentating on that for the BBC, and wow, did I go wild when that went in. And those types of things, you know, are all special things for me. But nothing can ever really beat the Sergio Aguero moment, you know, that day. I mean, I was presenting the radio program. I'm just looking to see if I can actually find the audio of that moment. Just bear with me, and maybe I can find it, and I'll play a little bit of it. It's only a few seconds, but it might just give you an idea of how emotional that was for me. But to come from behind when I thought City weren't going to win it, you know, was pretty special. Here it is.
And I think Bolton have gone down because the Queen's Park Rangers bench have just reacted very strongly here. So it looks like Bolton Wanderers have been relegated. It means Queen's Park Rangers are safe, whatever happens here. Will they take the eye off it just for a second? United have won 1-0. It's Sergio Aguero, and he scores the goal! Sergio Aguero scores the goal! Manchester City have won the Premier League for the first time since 1968. Manchester City have a new generation of heroes. There have been 21 different managers, 4 relegations and 4 promotions since Manchester City last did this, but they beat their nemesis at Manchester United with the very last kick of the game here at the Etihad Stadium. Scenes of delirium here. Manchester City have done it.
So that's
amazing.
Just a little flavour of it.
No, even if you're not a City fan, that's just a, I don't know, it's a golden moment. It's something which everyone will cherish, maybe apart from maybe United fans.
I hope so. I mean, it's been regarded even by neutrals as possibly the greatest Premier League moment ever. I'd have rather that City had won it a bit more comfortably, and a lot of City fans will say that was typical City, that they came back from 2-1 down and both goals were scored in stoppage time. But a bit like when United won the Champions League final with goals in stoppage time against Bayern Munich, the drama was enhanced by the fact that it was done in that way. And nothing that ever happens in football in my lifetime, previous or in, it doesn't matter what happens in the future, nothing will ever beat that moment. The only thing that would ever come close to it would be if they beat United or maybe Liverpool in the Champions League final with a goal in stoppage time. But the odds of that happening are very, very remote. But even then, having seen the Aguero moment, it can only ever get close to it. I don't think you could ever actually beat it. And I mean, I not only was I commentating, but when the game, and I'm speaking as a fan, remember, here, as well as a professional. So to be able to commentate on that moment was magic anyway. But then after the match, I managed to get on the pitch as a journalist, but I didn't really have the rights to go on the pitch. But people knew me, and I was able to walk onto the pitch, and I had a microphone, and I was live on the radio, and I interviewed probably 10 of the players that played in that game while the trophy was being presented, while they were doing the lap of honour. And then when the game finished, and the whole broadcast had finished and everybody had gone home, and I was one of the last people in the stadium. Vincent Kompany was still out on the pitch, still wearing his kit, kicking a ball about with one of his children, and I got a picture with him, which is on my Facebook page, of me stood with him, holding the Premier League trophy, holding his medal, touching his medal, and I was wearing his captain's armband, which he gave to me, which I still have, which is my most treasured possession. So I have Captain Vincent Kompany's armband from that day in 2012, which is very, very special to me. And I have a picture which is, as far as I'm concerned, unique in that, it was on the day with the captain wearing his kit, me holding his medal and wearing his captain's armband. Those moments can never be repeated. I obviously understand how very, very lucky I am to have been in that position, because lots of fans would have loved to have done that. And I don't take it for granted, and I never will. I wish I was still commentating now, and being honest, because that was the job that I loved the most. But to anybody to have been there that day, my wife and my son were there, and they were crying. And a friend of mine who was a lot older than me, who sadly didn't live many more years after that, but he was there. He'd seen success in '68. He was there. He'd been at the cup final when Bert Troutman broke his neck in the '50s, and he was there again to see that Aguero moment. So those things were the things that made it extra, extra special. Now in the Champions League, it'll almost be expected. But up until that Aguero goal, none of that had been expected, which is why it can never be beaten.
Definitely. And I can touch on the Aguero moment and probably take one more. I want to touch on that, but we'll leave it for another time. So I'll just sneak in one extra question. That is, you mentioned how United have been the rival, or probably you don't expect United to challenge or take them seriously probably this season, because I think even United fans would not have expected where they are right now. So in this current scenario, do you think United are your rivals or Liverpool? Generally, in overall, not only this season, in the past, maybe since Klopp has come.
I think Liverpool and United are off the field very jealous of what City are doing at the moment. The expansion of the CFG, the group, with the clubs all around the world. Mumbai, I know, is one that City have bought fairly recently, but New York City and Melbourne and clubs in Uruguay and Spain, and that type of thing, I think is really infuriating the clubs of Manchester United and Liverpool. The fact that City are now getting a lot of the commercial sponsorship deals that might potentially have gone to Liverpool or United in the past have also annoyed them. The new CFA, the football academy with the mini stadium, it is something that I'm sure both clubs are jealous of, because it's a fantastic state-of-the-art place, and the owners have invested in a sixth form college and housing and done so many great things socially for the city of Manchester. On the field at the moment, the gap, it might not look big, but I think it is quite big between City and Liverpool and City United. And frankly, I think Liverpool are going to have to do a rebuilding job and maybe even a rethinking job if they want to go back to challenging for the Premier League. I think they exhausted this high pressing, high intensity game, which relies on a hell of a lot of work effort. And once you've won the league like that, can you continue to sustain it? Whereas City's model, which is much more about controlling the ball, more efficient with your energy, is longer lasting and more sustainable. United are a bit of a mixed match because they've got a bit of one thing and a bit of another, and probably too many egos. People like Pogba and maybe even Cavani, although I don't really know a lot about Cavani, could fall into that category. City have got it right at the moment, and as long as Pep's there and as long as Pep is motivated, then I can only see for the next few years City domination. But if these things go round, United and Liverpool won't go anywhere. They will continue to be the big rivals, because United are the city rivals, i.e. from the city of Manchester. They will always be, to us local fans, the biggest rivalry. we might not like Liverpool, particularly after the incident where they bombarded the team bus with missiles on the way to a Champions League game, which really knocked them down in most people's estimations. They'll always be a big rival. And certainly for the last couple of years, they've been the biggest on-pitch rivals. But off the pitch and in your head, as a City fan, it'll always be United, I think, that will be seen as the biggest rivals.
Definitely. So we'll wrap it up with one final question. And like, I'll not ask you as a City fan, but as an author and your time spent in media, if you had to give a piece of advice, because you have what I at least I can deduce is you have continuously, like how you said, rebuild yourself. Maybe first with maybe radio, then now you have gone to YouTube, because like YouTube is the flavor of the month, or maybe podcast. Like you have always stayed relevant in terms of the medium that is being consumed. So if you had to give a piece of advice to anyone, maybe starting out right now, what, like in terms of media, what advice would you give that person?
Be yourself. Don't try to be somebody else. Do something that you're passionate about, so that it's not a job, so that it's not a chore, so that it's something that you truly believe in. And I think that comes out. I think when you do something that you care about in any walk of life, not just in the media, you'll be a lot better at it. I never set out to have the career that I've had. I started working in a bank, and I did broadcasting as a hobby. And I was a volunteer for a long time. And you could say I was in the right place at the right time, or lucky, or perhaps a bit of determination as well. But certainly lots of passion that got me into the BBC and got me to the point where I'd been offered other opportunities within the media, which I didn't take because my passion laid with being involved with Manchester City. At the time, they weren't the flavour of the month as they are now. So me choosing City over my career progression would have been seen by a lot of people as being a bad thing. But I've always believed in the decisions that I've made. I'm not on earth to be motivated purely by money. You need money to live on, of course. And I probably could have been more famous and more wealthy if I'd have took a different route in my career, but I chose to stay with my passion. I've also chosen, for example, that when I've talked to potential sponsors, that I want to deal with people who think like me, that so something that fits with my ethics and the way I am. So I've never gone down the route of being sponsored by a betting company or a drinks company, even though they're the most common really to do the sort of things that I do. And again, that has limited potentially my income, but I feel as if none of us are perfect. I don't claim to be perfect in any way, but I hope that I have a certain integrity and a sort of combined with that passion, that means that when you hear or see something that I do, you know that it's genuine. It comes from the heart, and I mean what I say. And on that basis, anybody that's trying to have the type of career that I've had, I wish them good luck, but say, sorry about that. Stay with, do the thing that you believe in, that you're passionate about. Don't try to be somebody else or do something to please other people. Please yourself. And I know this is a million miles away from what we're talking about, but my heroes in life are two songwriters who wrote all the hits for ABBA. I know it's not particularly cool to admit to that sort of thing, but that's where my musical passion is. And I watch and listen to a lot of the words that are said by these two songwriters. And what they've always said consistently is that they don't write music for an audience or because they think an audience will like this type of music. They've wrote music that they like, that they would want to hear, that they enjoy. And I think that's one of the reasons why they've been so successful, because they've not compromised what they do to please somebody. So when I do a YouTube video, when I do a podcast, when I commentated, when I presented a radio program, whatever it might be, I did things because I thought that they would be good and that I would enjoy listening to them. not because I thought that a boss would like that, or that a particular part of the audience would like it, or that I was frightened of being criticised. So, follow your own instincts and your own passions. That's what I would. That's the best advice I would give.
And that's quite like deep, like even for me, like I've learned something, like like way to put out content for yourself, what you would consume or what you would like if you are a viewer, than rather going for the flavor of the month. So thank you so much, Ian, for coming and making this possible. I wish you all the best for your future podcast. And just before we go, I had put out like an Instagram post of it, that I'm going live with you, and Citizens INA, that is Man City Indonesia, had sent in the question that can Manchester City be Premier League champions this season if we look at the performance so far, which you have covered already in the beginning. And I would like to thank you once again. Hope we can talk again soon. Until then, everyone who is maybe a City fan, or who wants to, who aspires to, or anyone who just wants to know what City, can go and follow Ian's channel. He does amazing job. And thank you once again, Ian. Hope to talk to you again soon. Till then, take